Welcome to the IDP After Show Week 9 preview episode. I'm your host, Jeff Pomazal. We just survived the bye-mageddon and saw another round of injuries decimate our teams once again. Hopefully, you and your teams found a way to sneak out a win. If you did, congratulations. But if not, you found the right place to get it right before we head into a very pivotal Week 9 matchup. This week, Pete Nova, who is a senior analyst over at Player Profiler, is joining me, and together we're going to be bringing you 6 players that we're a little more excited on than consensus this week, 6 players that we're tempering our expectations on, and 2 players that even after all this time this season, we just don't know what to do with. If that sounds like something you and your teams could use, sit back, listen in, and let's get after it on this episode of the IDP After Show.
This is the IDP After Show.
All right, let's jump right into these players, Pete, for Week 9. You do a fantastic job writing up the weekly streaming defense article. Let's see how you do with some IDPs this week for Week 9. Who's that defensive lineman that got you a little more excited this week than most?
Yeah, for me, it's Khalil Mack, Chargers defensive end, or I guess you could say linebacker hybrid. He's going up against the Titans this week, and Khalil Mack coming off of that forearm injury. He really hasn't seen that full playing time yet, right? 12 snaps in week 7 in his first game back, and then 28 snaps in week number 8. But he also had 45 snaps in week number 1. So we know when he is back to health and the team feels confident, they're going to get him out there full time. This is not a rotational guy that they're going to take on and off the field in certain downs and situations. But for him, he's going up against the Titans this week. He provides a huge lift for this defense, for the Chargers, who really have dealt with a ton of injuries this year. 4.3 sacks per game. It's the most by any team allowed in the NFL. The Tennessee Titans are giving up. And 5 separate players last week for the Colts generated at least a sack or a half sack, in their matchup against the Titans. 3 players with a full sack, 2 with a half sack. And he's had a sack in back-to-back weeks since returning. And again, that's been with limited time, 12 snaps, 28 snaps last week. And I think Jesse Minter is probably dying to get him back on the field, right? Their pass rush has really been anemic since he's been gone. They don't really have a ton of guys that can get to the quarterback. And so I think they're going to get him on the field and try to unleash him this week in a much more favorable matchup.
I love this call. I was really pumping up Mac too this week. Tennessee is just oozing points to the opposing defensive linemen this season. And when you have a rookie quarterback, that tends to happen quite often. We see these rookie quarterbacks drafted into these situations that are less than ideal. There's not a lot of draft capital around them, and they're like the only like shiny object on the whole team. And then they're just kind of expected to kind of like raise the fleet here, and they really can't. And to Ward's credit, he's been sticking in there, not getting like gun shy, and he's been sacked 23 times this season. And like you mentioned, 5 players got in on it last week. So I do think that game script plays a big role in this game too. I can see the Chargers their offense has just been really clicking. Kind of surprising how pass heavy they've been this season, to be honest. They were kind of on paper in the preseason, going to be a run heavy team, drafting Amari Hampton, having Najee Harris. Well, that was week 1, and things have drastically changed since then. So they've really become a pass happy team. And I think that the game script is going to force Tennessee to be throwing the ball. And that's what we love to see opportunities for Khalil Mack to have. So I'm really in on this call. I love Khalil Mack. Like you said, starting to pick up a few more snaps every week. And he's a vet. He knows what he's doing. He doesn't need to have a ton of snaps to be efficient in those snaps. So
yeah, and with the Titans, I would have thought that sometimes they fire a head coach. You assume maybe they kind of come back with fire a little bit for like a nice bounce back week. Sometimes we see that, and then it's usually not sustained maybe for the full season, but it did nothing for them. They look absolutely lost. I feel bad for Cam Ward. It's a pretty tough situation. Keeping in mind too, Calvin Ridley didn't practice today. Now it is a Wednesday when we're recording this, and a lot of the veterans do sit, but right, he might be without more reliable weapons and that might force him to holding onto the ball even more. So I think, like you said, game script plays a huge factor. They're going to be up in this game, and I expect them to have to throw, and Khalil Mack should be able to put his ears back and go get the quarterback.
It's a tough message too to send your team when the trade deadline is approaching, and literally they say everyone's available except for Cam Ward and Jeffrey Simmons. Everyone's looking around that locker room like, what did I do? So I can totally buy into that narrative about not having that fire. Like, nobody's vested in that team there. So it's a tough sell for sure. So
yeah.
all right, a player that I'm kind of excited about, and this is probably a deeper league play, probably 3 defensive linemen, possibly 4, with 4 teams on the bye this week. But Donovan Ezeiruaku has quietly kind of put together a great rookie season. And I know that rookie seasons, we sometimes as fantasy football managers get a little antsy and we start to panic a little bit because players don't perform, because they were a high draft capital, because we invested in them early in our rookie drafts. We kind of get nervous, but Ezeiruaku has kind of slowly been putting things together. He's got a great matchup this week in week 9 versus the Arizona Cardinals. Arizona's given up a bunch of sacks. Kyler's not quite as elusive as he was earlier. He's got that foot injury that he's coming back from. He's got a questionable tag heading into this week. We might see Brissett again this week, and that worked out pretty well for the Packers in week 7, who got to him a ton of times. The Cowboys just need someone to make plays, because after they traded Micah Parsons away, they really have no one along this defensive line. If you listen to the show often, there's always someone on the fade list about fading the Dallas defensive line because they don't have anybody, whether it's Clowney, whether it was Sam Houston, all these players just don't do anything to move the needle at all. But Ezeiruaku has kind of been a player that's done that. Since week 5, he's been the number 5 overall defensive lineman, according to PFF. Shout out to Mike Woolard for finding that little nugget. He's got an 87.9, and that kind of puts him in the ranks of a Myles Garrett and a Micah Parsons. And anytime you're kind of surrounded by those types of players, you have to be doing something right. And so for a player that has no help along that defensive line, he's kind of doing it on his own, and as a rookie, like, this is definitely a player to kind of take notice of. We've seen a steady increase in snaps over the last few weeks, which is very promising. I know that statistically, he probably doesn't have like those flash weeks that we really want to see. He does have one double-digit week to his credit just a couple weeks ago. But like I mentioned, he's not a player that we need to panic on right now. He was highly ranked coming out of college, both in the real NFL and also in the fantasy circles. And so this is a player that maybe in week 9 against an Arizona Cardinals team that kind of has been prone to giving up some sacks. They're the number 4 team right now, according to John Macri, as far as points to the position. So, this is an ideal matchup for Ezeiruaku to kind of really have a coming out party.
Yeah, and you mentioned Arizona. I think the nice thing is that when you have a Dallas offense that puts pressure on teams, it's going to, again, have a pass-happy game script, is what I would be expecting. You also look at the last 2 weeks, the Arizona Cardinals giving up 23 pressures and 17 pressures in the last 2 weeks against defensive linemen. So I think that's definitely plays into his favor as well. We've seen some guys have some pretty nice games, right? Kwity Paye had 2 sacks, 2 TFLs, 4 pressures for the Colts. We also saw Nwosu from the Seattle Seahawks with 2 sacks, 2 tackles for loss, 4 pressures, right? So I think they can be successful. Cardinals are allowing a really, really high pressure rate. And so ultimately it's just about a matter of getting there. And to your point, he's done a really good job over the last couple of weeks. And this is a team and a defense that's really depleted of any talent whatsoever. So, it kind of, it's one of those things where it's like he stands out like a sore thumb because there's really nobody else making plays here. So I think game script should help them in terms of being in passing down situations, and if he can get a sack and maybe a couple of tackles, like you said, in deeper leagues, he might be a good play.
And like you mentioned, like, this game has a very good over-under, so we're going to see a lot of plays. And like you mentioned, that Dallas offense is really clicking. It's not the last time we're going to talk about the Dallas offense on the show, so kind of stay tuned for that. So let's switch over to the linebackers here, Pete. And who's the linebacker that's got you a little salivating this week heading into week 9?
Yeah, for me, it's Nate Landman. He's been really awesome this year since coming over from the Atlanta Falcons. He's really found himself in this Chris Shula defense for the not the Arizona Cardinals, for the Los Angeles Rams. But he's really found his way here. Totaled 67 tackles this year. He's got a couple of tackles for a loss. He's got 1.5 sacks, right? He's got a forced fumble. He's recovered 2 of them in the 7 games so far. And I think the game script here is going to be beneficial, right? We have the Tyler Shuck is now going to be under center. The Saints just announced that Spencer Rattler is not going to be the starter for the rest of the season. We'll see if that changes or not, but Tyler Shuck is going to get his first start in an NFL game. And if you watched him last week where again, to his defense, they didn't really have much time to prepare, right? He kind of just got thrown into the game midway through, and it was a disaster of a game. But he's got a little more time to prepare, but I still think he's going to have some rookie jitters. And Landman is in a good spot here, right? You're facing an offense that has a pretty conservative passing attack. Saints are averaging 8 yards in terms of their targets, so they're not really pushing the ball downfield. It's really been a heavy emphasis in short passes, right? They have 149 passing attempts under 10 yards this year and just 38 deep attempts. And the reason I bring that up for Landman is because for him, he has not been great in coverage, right? He's given up 21 receptions, but if he can keep things in front of him, I think, he can get those quick tackles where, he's rallying to the football. And I think it could be a game where he's making some tackles even in the pass game. And then you also just factor in that this is an offense that likes to run the football, right? They lost Kendra Miller. It's Alvin Kamara. They haven't been extremely efficient on the ground this year. And I expect him to have a really nice outing. He got his first sack of the season last week. He's got 457 snaps. That's 65 per game. And that's on pace for him to have the most of his NFL career. So I think he's set up to play really well against the Saints team. That's really, we talk about the Titans before, talk about the Saints now. I mean, this is just trying to feast off of bad offenses. And I think Landman's set up to have a nice day.
And again, agree with this one 100%. Like anytime you can keep the plays in front of you, you just have an opportunity to make plays. When we look at like stat lines and things like that, and you see Spencer Rattler with 25 completions, and then you look, it's for 208 yards, that he's probably only getting like 4 or 5 yards per completion there. And that's perfect because it keeps everything in front and Landman can just pile on tackles. The Rams have historically been like a very linebacker look team, and Landman just kind of sees control of that this year. And he's getting like, 95, 96, 100% of snaps in games. So just been like thriving there. The only hesitation I have with this one is if this game gets out of control, clearly game script is going to be big. They could be looking at the Rams with running the ball quite a bit in the third and fourth quarter here. And with Landman on the sidelines, he might take an early day. So
sure.
I like the call because he's been playing exceptionally well. No one saw this coming, with him coming over from Atlanta. He was just kind of a cast off, a jag there. And then all of a sudden he just really thrived and, put Omar Spate's pub to the side and all of that stuff. So yeah. Good stuff.
I think you the one and I guess the one caveat to what you're saying too, game script wise, I could see if the Saints are trying to, or they have to play from behind, and maybe they are pushing the ball downfield because this Rams offense is so good that it could cause some trouble. The one thing I will say, Saints defense has been a little bit sneaky good over the last couple of weeks, where they may be able to keep this, a little bit tighter than people expect. Not because they're going to shut the Rams down, but they're just ultimately playing pretty respectable defense for a team that's kind of dead in the water right now.
Ooh, there's that streaming defensive side coming out in you. I like it. It.
Don't get too crazy. I'm not advocating to start them this week.
Okay. Though. All right. Well, you know what they say in the Twitter streets. You got to be careful. So you got to be careful what you say. So, the Rams do get Puka back this week. So, I mean, they're going to have their full complement, and coming off the bye, they're going to be coming out firing. So linebacker I am digging this week is one Mr. Eric Wilson. Wilson has had 5 straight games with 5 or more tackles, which is fantastic to see. Very consistent. We love that high tackle floor. And that was with and without Blake Cashman. And we saw Blake Cashman come back last week, and we all expected Wilson to go back to the bench and Ivan Pace and Cashman to be the 1 and 2 linebackers there in Brian Flores' defense. But that wasn't the case. Eric Wilson ended up playing 59 snaps. That was more than 82% of the snaps. So a solid day for a linebacker 2 or 3. Not quite that 90% that we love to see all the time, but for what you had invested in Eric Wilson, we're going to take that all day. He gets a dream matchup versus Detroit. Detroit is oozing points to the opposing defense, especially the linebackers, giving up 19.7 tackles to the opposing team and 20.3 in their last 3 games. So we get to see a great matchup. Detroit offense, like the Rams, is very efficient. They're on the field for a very long time. The Minnesota offense might be a little in disarray. I know that they finally broke the will of a one Mr. Carson Wentz and sent him to the IR. I know that J.J. McCarthy is going to be back under center this week, supposedly fully healthy. We don't know what that offense is going to quite look like. So this could be another scenario where we see Detroit on the field a lot, which means great opportunities for Eric Wilson. Last time they saw Detroit on the field, they played Tampa Bay, and Savoy Dennis had 12 tackles, and Levante David had 7 tackles. So that's an ideal day. We would be happy with Eric Wilson getting 7 tackles. Detroit is favored by 9 in this matchup at home this weekend. So again, like we mentioned before, game script could be a narrative here where we see a lot of running during third and fourth quarters by one Mr. David Montgomery and Jahmyr Gibbs. So thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think it's a good deep play. It's nice to see a player like Eric Wilson, who, gets drafted by the Minnesota Vikings, right? Plays there for a few years, then comes back, right? And has looked good, right? I mean, it's funny because he goes to a division rival, right, in Green Bay Packers, there for 3 years. Then he comes back to Minnesota this year. And I think to your point, right, the Lions have been able to control the clock a ton. So I think that could be very favorable for a guy like Wilson, who is probably going to have to step up and make a lot of tackles right now. The defensive front has looked pretty bad for the Vikings the last couple of weeks. And so I'm expecting these running backs to get to the second level, which should benefit a guy like Eric Wilson this week. So I think it's a good call out. I think he sets up pretty well. And as you said, I mean, he's given us a really good floor over the last couple of weeks.
So sticking in that same game, sticking on that same side of the ball, who's the defensive back that you like this week?
Yeah, I like Harrison Smith, and it's nice to see the old man kind of getting back in his groove a little bit. Week 8, right? He tallies up 8 solo tackles, also comes through with one assisted tackle, and kind of similar to the Eric Wilson thing. I expect them to be on the field a ton. I don't think the Vikings are going to be able to sustain a ton of drives, which should have the defense out there on the field. And I expect, Smith's role, right? He's really more of that deep safety. So he'll kind of be the guy that's preventing the big plays for the Lions. And we know they can be explosive, but the uptick, right, of him just producing well and starting to kind of find his rhythm is why I'm kind of keying in on him this week. If you need a little bit of I wouldn't say it's a deep play with Harrison Smith, but I think a lot of people are kind of down on him with the age, and he didn't really start the season off very hot. And he's starting again to start play a little bit better. He's got a 77.8% completion rate allowed in coverage, so that's kind of concerning. He hasn't allowed any touchdowns, but again, similar to my feel on Landman, right? I'm okay with defenders that give up receptions, because as long as they can rally to the football and make the tackle, right, that's a benefit. And also Harrison Smith's a player that I don't think they mind having him come down in and help on the run defense, which has struggled a lot for them. So I think he's a solid play in deeper leagues. Hopefully he can keep going and getting into rhythm against the Lions and keep it going.
And oftentimes we see these players who start to play hot and just kind of ride the heater. And, and Harrison Smith is one of those very streaky players over his career, which has been a great one, where he just gets on these runs where he's just kind of like dialed in, locked in, which is really interesting to like kind of think about, especially at the defensive back position, because we see such a turnover from year to year, and even from week to week, these players are just kind of revolving. But Harrison Smith is like one of those cornerstone players that just somehow finds a way to get his nose in the ball. And, like you said, we've got a lot of consistent drives for Detroit, but we also have the deep shot, with Williams going over the top. They like to use Tesla a lot. Even Amon-Ra St. Brown, I know he works that short to intermediate game a little more often, but even when Detroit is winning, they are not opposed to throw the ball. We've seen, Goff have a couple 5 touchdown games where, they should just be running the ball. Why aren't they running? Just put this away. But, Dan Campbell is just that he's just built a little different, and he likes to just do things a little bit different. So,
yeah, he's a little unorthodox. I think that's probably putting it lightly.
Yeah. Well, he's got those Applebee commercials. So that's another.
Gotta love the Applebee commercials.
Yeah, and to see now that they've got CJ Stroud in there too, like, man, maybe you should focus more on throwing the ball to Nico Collins, dude.
Between the CJ Stroud ones, the Trevor Lawrence and Travis Hunter one, I think. I think that's you ever like the Burger King commercial when they go do the Whopper 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 one where it's like Whopper Whopper, like
Yep.
it almost like gets stuck in your head. Like that's one that I almost get like PTSD when I see it, like I almost dream about it. Like, and that's the Trevor Lawrence and Hunter. They did so many Trevor Lawrence and Travis Hunter commercials this offseason because I think they thought it was going to be such a good that they were gonna be able to make good money and because they're putting these stars on the screen because they're gonna have a big year and it was gonna be such a big thing with Travis playing both ways and it really hasn't panned out that way. But I do think he can have a solid second half of the year. I don't know for IDP, but at least I think he's gonna start playing on offense a little bit more.
Not to go down that road very much, but like the whole Travis, he had a great last game, right? We saw him, and usually coming out of the bye, that's when rookies really start to click. They get that extra week of reps and things like that. So, and with Travis Hunter, even with his lack of playing a lot of defensive snaps in leagues like Sleeper, where he's defensive back eligible, he's still a top 12 option right now at the defensive back position. And if you can score consistently from your defensive back position, he's getting like 10, 11, 12 points a game. I'm very happy with that because the defensive back position is so volatile from week to week. It's hard to be consistent. And if you can have a consistent piece in your lineup, that allows you to kind of gamble a little bit with your DB2, and you can swing for some upside there if you got somebody that's not going to leave you with a goose egg. So,
yeah, I would say to close out the Travis Hunter thing, I think and I think Richard Sherman said it best. Like, I feel like you need to allow him to get into a rhythm. And I personally think he has a chance to be an elite corner. I don't think he has a chance to be an elite wide receiver. I wish they would play him full time on defense. We'll see what happens. But like you said, coming out of a bye, right, kind of licking their wounds a little bit, maybe they deploy a little bit of a better plan and start to say, okay, let's self-scout a little bit, see what's working, see what's not, and try to maybe come up with a better game plan for the second half of the year.
Yeah, because throwing to Brian Thomas is not working right now. So I don't know if he's got the yips or the shoulder or whatever he's got. It's not working for him right now. So
no, definitely not.
So going to my defensive back, this is going to be a player that you're probably going to be scratching your head, kind of wondering where is this coming from, but he's definitely going to be a player available in your waivers. And that's going to be a one Max Melton. And the reason I am starting him is not because of his performance through the first 7 weeks of the season. It's actually because of his matchup. We kind of mentioned the Dallas Arizona game earlier when we were talking about players. This game has right now the highest over under for the week at 52 points. So clearly there's going to be some offense there. Dallas is definitely a pass happy team. Now that they've got a healthy CeeDee Lamb, they got a George Pickens there. Even with Ferguson there in the middle, he's going to provide a lot of opportunities. And so this game has potentials for some shootouts. The one thing with Dallas is they're giving up 15.7 tackles to the cornerback position right now, and by far the most in the league. And again, with having the volume that there's going to be played in this game with the over-under and the projected amount of points, that means a lot of snaps and even a lot of opportunities for Melton to make some pass breakups. And if he does allow the passes to be caught, which he has done this season, he's going to be able to make the tackles as well. And either way, he's scoring points for our lineup, either as a pass breakup or as a tackle. So it doesn't matter to me. Actually, I hope he gets the completion because then they can stay on the field even longer. So if he gets the pass breakups, that kind of ends drives. Melton has been playing close to 95% in all the games he's been healthy in this year. He did miss week 5 and he did get a little dinged up in week 2, but otherwise he's been an every down player for the Cardinals. And I know that his PFF scores are kind of brutal right now. And that's honestly what we like to see, because that means that they're going to shy away from probably a Will Johnson who's playing opposite of him. And they're going to probably heavily target Max Melton this week. And so if I'm the offensive coordinator for the Dallas Cowboys, I'm looking at my weapons this week between Ferguson, between CeeDee Lamb, between George Pickens. And I'm like, yep, I know right where the ball's going. And I can see Melton having like probably a season high this week for tackles and fantasy football points.
Yeah. And I think I would probably expect him to play a lot more on George Pickens than CeeDee Lamb, which I think body type wise, he profiles as a guy you pick on if you're looking at matchups, right? I mean, there's a guy, he's 6 foot, 190. George Pickens is a long physical player. And as you noted, right, Melton's he's gotten targeted a ton. And the secondary has been pretty beat up. But I mean, he had one game where he was targeted 10 times in week 1 against the Saints. Last week alone, targeted 5 times. He's been targeted 5 or more times in every game but 2 this season that he's played in. So I think he's a good call out, right? I mean, it's never sexy to pick corners. Well, I guess I would probably defer to you, but it never seems sexy to pick a corner to put in your lineup if you can go the safety route when looking at a DB. But I definitely think that if you're going to target putting one in your lineup, it's one that you think will be targeted heavily because they can just clean up with the tackles after the receptions are given up and maybe get a pass breakup or 2 in there. Maybe get lucky and pick one off, but we're probably more banking on maybe a PBU and a couple of cleanup tackles from him.
You're 100% accurate. Like if I'm looking for safe points, I'm looking for consistency. I'm going to roll out a safety and hopefully a box safety with that. But sometimes we get to these bye weeks, we get some injuries, we get some players who are kind of questionable late Sunday night games into Monday night games, and we're just not willing to risk it. And then so a player like Melton is like, he might be, he plays at noon. Let's roll him out. Let's go with this. Johnny the Greek does an amazing job with his cornering the cornerback article every week. He's got an amazing hit rate. So be on the lookout for that. I'm going to guess that Milton's probably going to be one of his players this week that he's going to be highly in on just because of the matchup. Like that's what we do. We look for matchups, and the Cowboys are the dream matchup for opposing cornerbacks. And this week it's Milton's turn. So just to kind of recap here, some players we're a little higher on this week heading into week 9. We've got Khalil Mack and Donovan Ezeiruaku at the defensive line position, Nate Landman and Eric Wilson at the linebacker position, Harrison Smith and Max Melton at the defensive back position. So we always are higher on players every week. That means we're a little lower or fading some players this week. Now, that doesn't mean that we're necessarily not starting them, but we're maybe kind of tempering expectations a little bit. And I think that's probably what's going to happen with these first 2 defensive linemen. So, Pete, who's a defensive lineman that maybe you're kind of like tempering expectations a little bit heading into week 9?
Yeah, Will Anderson versus the Denver Broncos is a guy that I am tempering expectations. You look at him, right? He's averaging 3.3 tackles per game. And overall, right? I mean, he's 0.7 per game in terms of sacks. He's getting a lot of pressure on the quarterbacks, but ultimately Denver's only allowing 1 sack per game. And the thing that I'm trying to look at, and I'm trying to paint the picture for what I expect from this game, right? Denver likes to throw the ball quickly, get the ball out fast, right? We see Bo Nix, and a lot of people call him kind of that yak merchant because Sean Payton, these smoke screens, right, to the wide receivers, right? A lot of short dink and dunk passes, and it forces the defense to really that's why a lot of the passes are batted down. So maybe Anderson can get some PBUs because that's why Nix has a lot of his passes broken down because they're expecting him to get the ball out quickly. But when you think about it, Denver right now utilizing motion 25.35% of their plays. They're also running play action 33.3% of their pass attempts. So again, it doesn't allow the defense to kind of pin their ears back and go. A lot of smoke and mirrors right now with this offense. And you kind of have to keep your ears and, kind of perked up a little bit with Sean Payton because you don't know what he kind of has up his sleeves. And those things can slow that pass rush down. Right now, Will Anderson, 21.2% pressure rate. It's showing that he's been very highly effective this season, but I think Denver's combination of quick passing, the motion heavy scheme, and just solid protection all around is probably going to limit his matchup. Maybe he can salvage a day with a sack and get involved in the run game. I would think maybe a PBU too, but ultimately I don't think the ceiling should be very high for Will Anderson this week. And so I'm definitely tempering my expectations. I think it could be a sloppy game as well. We'll see, right? Denver hasn't faced a defense this good all season long. So maybe that plays into the Anderson's favor. But I think this offensive line can definitely take care of him this week.
I'm right there with you. Houston's defense finally looked like what they were supposed to look like last week. They definitely took care of business. We'll see if they can stack 2 in a row. I'm gonna double down here with the Houston hate here, and my call out is Danielle Hunter, and a lot of the same reasons that you had mentioned. Hunter's playing pretty well, even at the age of 31. It actually is his birthday today, so happy birthday to you, Danielle Hunter, if you're listening to the show. not a hater, just don't like it this week.
Yeah.
He has 29 total pressures on the season, which he's turned into 21 hurries, 3 hits, and 5 sacks, which is pretty solid for the year through the 7 games that he's played in. But that's only good for DL 45 on the season, and not the DL 2 that he was probably drafted at the start of the season. So the productivity is much declined from what we were thinking we were going to get with the Danielle Hunter. This week he takes on Denver, like you mentioned. They just don't allow sacks. They scheme up plays. I had them only giving up a couple sacks here, and actually 2 of them were credited to the guard, Quinn Mertz. And so, like they just get rid of the ball quickly. They're not going to be a team that's holding on to it. And Bo Nix just has this almost Mahomes-like ability to escape the pocket. He's not afraid to run. He's not going to sit back there and pat the ball 14 times. He's just going to get it and go. So not getting an opportunity to get sacks, an offense that motions and moves like they do to scheme away from certain players like a Danielle Hunter or like a Will Anderson, is not going to provide that opportunity. He is playing a healthy amount of snaps this season, so that hasn't been the issue. It just seems that he's a little bit slower this season, and he's not getting those efficiency in the snaps that he was getting last year. Last year, he had 45 hurries, 15 QB hits, 12 sacks on 74 pressures. And that's for a full season, obviously. But as we shared earlier, those numbers are kind of off the pace of reaching those numbers from last year. The biggest number that we've seen a decrease in is the 76 pressures for 74 last year, excuse me. In 2022, he had 76 pressures. In 2023, he had 80 pressures. Last year, in the 16 games, he had 74 pressures. This year, just 29 pressures through 7 games. So almost a full pressure less per game this year compared to last year. And when you think about a player who's only getting 4 or 5 pressures per game anyway, you're cutting into a lot of opportunity. You're cutting into like 15 to 18% of your opportunity to get a sack, to get a pass breakup, to get that fumble. And it's just not happening for Danielle Hunter this year. Even his tackle numbers are down from last year. Last year, he had 32 combined tackles on the season with 5 missed tackles. This year, he only has 13 combined tackles already through 7 games, but he already has 4 missed tackles. So combine the efficiency piece is coming down a little bit. Combine the tackle numbers aren't there as much as we'd like to see. He just seems to be like a player that we're kind of fading. So, tough matchup, strike 1. He's got the metrics are kind of rolling down strike 2. If I'm rolling him out as my defensive line 3, I'm probably okay with that. But if I'm in a start 2 league, I'm going to visit my friend Scott Soltis, and he's going to do an amazing job helping out with some defensive line streaming articles. Even last week's guest, Joey the Tooth, he does a IDP streaming article for defensive linemen too. I'm going to take a look at some of those players they have listed because I'm probably going to do better than Danielle Hunter this week.
Yeah, it's ironic that we picked both guys, and it seems like we're kind of similar in our mindset there as to why. I actually drafted a ton of Danielle Hunter in the D-Up Best Ball IDP league over at Fast Draft, and I had a lot of Will Anderson too, and I'm definitely not doing the best there. Khalil Mack is one guy that I drafted, and he's coming back, so that should definitely help. I don't know how you're doing over there, but I could definitely use a little bit of a bounce back from Danielle Hunter and Will Anderson here to kind of. I think I have one team I think they were 12th, and now they've slipped down to like 25 in the entire tournament. So I was doing okay, but I could definitely use a little bit of a boost. I will say, Denver this year, they've been this year specifically, they've been trying to run the ball outside a little bit more. That was a key emphasis this year coming in as opposed to last year. So maybe that kind of helps out the defensive ends unless they're going to kind of force the runs into their buddies, but we'll see. But yeah, kind of like you, same points you put up, and I don't really have too much to add, right? It kind of feels like we're kind of in alignment with both of these guys on this team.
I'm feeling pretty good about D-Up at the moment right now because I'm feeling pretty confident as being in first place right now. So we could just stop the count right now. So I'm good with that. So
who's on the roster? You got to at least share that.
Oh, okay. Well, obviously Myles Garrett is pretty much carrying. Last week he did all the heavy lifting. I got Brian Burns, Spillane, Sherwood, who is a player we're going to talk about in a little bit. I got Dre Greenlaw, who's finally going to get to play a second game of the season, and then Bobby Wagner. So yeah. Okay. Feeling pretty blessed right now.
Bobby's been a nice little addition, kind of raising that floor there. I don't think many people expected him to look as good as he has. Yeah, my best team's 25th. I've Vaughn, Verse, Burns, Alukuwan, Walker, and then Buda Baker. So maybe I can catch up to you, but you got a pretty decent lead. You're at least over 100 points on me. So
Well, it's a long season, and like the Myles Garrett 5-sack game when I scored over 100 points, it was like, thank you, appreciate it. Well, end the count right now. Stop it. So
yeah.
we'll see how we are in a couple weeks. I got Garrett on a bye this week, so I'm gonna suffer a little bit. So
I guess Garrett's in the boot is the 2 times booster. So if you don't know, right, it's fast draft. You draft 6 guys, and then you get boosters, or you get and I guess he must be the 2 times player, which is like the MVP
yes,
slot if you do DFS. So 5 sacks, yeah, wow, that's a
it was a 102-point game, so that was fantastic. Yeah, and then Wagner, like you said, getting him in the 6th round was like, I'll take Bobby Wagner in the end all day, and he's been, like you said, having a really good season for the 95-year-old vet that he is. So
First of all, he's got more points than Buda Baker and Trayvon Walker combined in that one game. He's got 30 more points than they've given me so far. So that's kind of crazy. So thankfully he's on a bye for everybody else this week.
I'm excited to see kind of like the postseason wrap up. You know, I'm sure Scott's going to do some things. Jay Colhagen's going to do some wrap up. You know, they were big and instrumental in kind of getting a lot of that data off at the beginning of the year. So it'll be kind of interesting to kind of break down teams and see, you know, things that worked. Obviously, drafting healthy players is going to be by far the most important thing. But you know, just kind of seeing how certain combinations of like builds did for rosters and management construction. So it'll be kind of fun to see at the end of the season. So
yeah, a lot of fun.
It's been great. It's been a fun tournament to be a part of for sure. So you have a player that I'm kind of high on for season long, but this week, not so much. So tell us about this linebacker that you don't like in week 9.
Yeah, I mean, I guess we're sticking to the trend of staying in this game. For me, it's Alex Singleton versus Houston, and Alex Singleton, since he's arrived in Denver, of course, he had the injury last year that kind of, ended his season very quickly. But, he had 122 tackles in 2023, 118 tackles in 2022, right? He's been awesome for Denver at racking up tackles. And he's been a very highly graded run stopper. He's 10th out of 80 linebackers per PFF this season so far. Where he struggled has been in coverage, right? 56th out of 80 in coverage. And Dre Greenlaw does come back this week. Now, with Greenlaw back, I expect Justin Stranad to be the odd man out. But Stranad has been the better player than Alex Singleton. And if Singleton, if we see Houston get this passing game going a little bit, we saw them break out a little last week. It might force them to bring Stranad out there more, and maybe Singleton doesn't see himself on the field as much as we've seen. Now, he saw 77 snaps versus the Giants with Greenlaw back, keeping in mind that was like a quick tempo, high, fast-paced game, tons of plays in that because both teams scored over 30 points. So that definitely boosted up the snap counts. But overall, I think Dre Greenlaw, they're going to need him this week, right? No Patrick Surtain. They're going to need a guy to kind of provide an edge. And I think I'm not saying Singleton's not going to have a good week. I just am tempering my expectations. He's been solid this year, though, as a tackler, right? Racking up 46 total tackles. But ultimately, the reason I have cause for concern this week is because how poor the offensive line is. And the running backs are not guys that have juice to like burst through to get to the second level. Nick Chubb is not the same guy we've seen, right? And then you also have Woody Marks, who's been more effective as a pass catcher. He's been good. He's definitely providing a nice change of pace for sure. But I think the defensive front is going to eat up the run game against the offensive line this week, which is gonna have an issue getting to that second level. I don't expect them to break a lot of runs to the second level. In addition to that, Hufanga has been used almost as an additional linebacker in the box for Denver, and he's getting more and more involved. And, with how this team has struggled, I expect Dre Greenlaw to be the guy that's going to be sent on blitzes. But you also got to counteract the fact that that leaves Singleton to be the one in pass coverage. And we've seen Stranad blitz a lot and be very effective. I think Greenlaw could be the guy that they send out there. But again, maybe it's flip-flopped because Singleton has struggled so much in pass protection, but in pass coverage. But overall, I just think that the defensive line is not going to allow much to get to the second level because of how bad this offensive line is. They don't generate a ton of push. And I think ultimately it's going to limit the opportunities. I think Dre Greenlaw, look, he pretty much got an extra week to get healthy because of the suspension, right? So I think they're not going to limit him too much with his snaps. And hey, I don't know. I could be wrong because this is also the same game Alex Singleton was ejected from last time they played CJ Stroud. He got up in his grill and it was like a whole back and forth and they ejected him from the game. So I don't think that's going to happen again. Maybe Singleton comes out pissed off, but we'll see. But that's kind of how I see the game going. I don't think he's going to be a no-show. I just don't think he's going to be that guy that's going to rack up a ton of tackles this week.
I actually, I'm really with you on this just because of the fact of like that Houston offense has been pretty anemic most of the season, and we haven't really seen what we were hoping. That offensive line is just decimated. Doesn't give CJ Stroud a lot of time to throw. The running game has been pretty much non-existent. So defenses kind of know what's coming. And this Denver defensive front line is like on a record-setting pace as far as sacks goes. So you're going to get a lot of pressure. The only thing that I'm a little hesitant about here is with Surtain being out, then all of a sudden that becomes a Riley Moss kind of as the de facto defensive back one. Does that provide an opportunity for Houston to maybe throw a little bit more where they're not locking down those receivers as much as they do with Surtain? Because you remove Surtain from any defensive line or a defensive unit, there's a trickle-down effect to that. So Surtain locking players down, the quarterbacks have to hold on to the ball a little bit longer than they'd like to, and that leads to, like a record-setting pace for sacks. So I don't think it's going to have a huge impact, especially if Nico Collins is still out with that concussion. I don't know if, like the likes of Jalen Noel or, Higgins are definitely scaring the defensive Broncos this week. So I'm with you on that as much as it pains me.
Yeah, I do got to know he wasn't suspended. He wasn't ejected. It was like a personal foul late in the game that ended up extending the drive. I had to fact check that for a second. What I would say too, you touched on it, right? No Surtain. I don't think we're going to see Jahdae Barron take Surtain's spot. I think it's going to be Abrams Drain. So in case anybody was thinking about streaming Barron now that Surtain is going to miss some time, I don't think that's going to thrust Barron into the starting role. So just keep that in mind too. I think Abrams Drain is going to be the guy. I think Barron's going to be more that nickel slot guy. And right now, Jaquan McMillan has that locked in. And to your point, Nico Collins, Christian Kirk, they did practice limited today, which is an encouraging sign that they'll be back. But we'll have to play it by ear, of course.
That is significant too on a Wednesday, like you said earlier. A lot of times it's the veteran rest day, and so for them being out there getting anything, it's a very positive sign. So I do have some Nico Collins shares that my teams definitely need a little boost from him this season. So he hasn't been the same Nico. So
yeah, that offense has been really, really tough. Maybe they get things going, but it's going to be a tough week to keep that momentum.
Denver's not quite the get right team to get the offense right. So,
no.
But my linebacker this week has got a lot of fantasy managers scratching his head. Their Daiyan Henley has just been, he's no stranger to disappearing for fantasy managers. I don't think anyone will ever forget the David Copperfield act that he pulled last season in the fantasy playoffs when he just goose-egged everyone in a dream matchup. So, we've seen him over the last few weeks trying to almost recreate that vanishing act. Henley started off the season with 2 monster games, 8 tackles and a sack in week 1, 10 tackles and a sack in week 2. And we were like, this is the season. This is the Daiyan Henley LB1 season. And since those first 2 weeks, he has 34 tackles over the 6 games and 0 sacks. 5 of those games have been single-digit performances. That's not what we kind of expected from him this season after his hot start. And losing Junior Colson to IR this preseason, we thought for sure that he was going to be locked and loaded as the LB1 good to go, and we just haven't seen that from him. Actually, he was outplayed from weeks 4 to 6 by Troy Dye, was out there even outplaying him. Troy Dye, who has been, the definition of a jag in the NFL, and so it just is an odd thing to see a player of Daiyan Henley's caliber and skill set to just kind of be able to just disappear. If you put any stock into PFF, it does a pretty good job of indicating how well a player is doing in those snaps. Daiyan Henley right now is currently the linebacker 108 in overall grade at the linebacker position with a 55.4 overall grade. He's not going to lose his job. No, but it's a little concerning that he's done this disappearing act before. And over the last 2 games, he has just 6 combined tackles. And it kind of has that vibe of like, okay, when are you gonna have that bounce back? Fantasy Pros has him this week as the linebacker 16 this week. And I know that there are 4 teams on a bye, but I kind of have him closer to a LB4 this week for me. I'd rather start a player like Drake Thomas or a Teddy Buchanan or a Mac Wilson, especially in a matchup versus Tennessee. Tennessee is not a great matchup because they're going to have to throw the ball a lot. I'd rather start a secondary piece for the Chargers, or I would start a defensive lineman, which we gave a couple shout outs earlier in the show. So I don't know if this is the get right game for Henley either. But I know a lot of fantasy managers are probably scratching their heads like, oh, I drafted this guy super early. I got to put him out there, and maybe just a lot of name recognition at this point.
Yeah, he had a low of under 40 snaps last week. So it wasn't out there nearly as much. And then you talk about the game script here, right? This is a player that's not, he's a true box linebacker, right? He's not being utilized on the edge at all. He's strictly in the middle of the field, and he's not being sent on a ton of pressure right now. He's generated pressure in every single game outside of one, which was week 6 against the Dolphins. But ultimately, right, he's not really getting to the quarterback. He started off strong, as you said, the first 2 weeks of the season, hasn't generated a sack since. Had a quarterback hit last week, which, maybe if you want to say that's encouraging, but ultimately he's not going to do much in terms of getting to the pass rusher, at least how Jesse Minter's been utilizing him this week. Maybe Minter gets a little exotic because they're versing a rookie quarterback and, tries to utilize him a little bit different, to kind of confuse, Cam Ward. But I'm with you. I wouldn't bank on him, being a guy that's going to rack up a bunch of points and a bunch of tackles here, unless maybe you're banking on him matching up with Tajay Spears, and this offense throws the running back the football a ton. Maybe he can kind of play cleanup in those coverage snaps as well. But that would be the only light that I see him having a better than an average day.
And you use the word "if" 3 times in your caveat there. So, as a fantasy manager heading into week 9, if I'm sitting here at like 4-4, 3-5, I can't have any ifs in my lineups this week. I got to have I need a win bad, and so if I'm sitting here at 6-2 or whatever it is, I can probably roll the dice with Henley, as my linebacker 3 or maybe even my linebacker 2. But, it's some dire straits right now for some fantasy teams out there. This is kind of a make or break week, for teams for seedings as far as getting into the playoffs, and for, maybe some teams are kind of in that boat of like, well, if this isn't the week, I'm going to be selling here soon. So,
yeah.
Heading to our last position, the defensive back position. Who's that defensive back that has you kind of like fading here a little bit in week 9?
Yeah, initially coming into it, I had Jaquan Brisker for the Bengals versus the Bengals. He's obviously on the Bears here. I was a little bit torn, right? Joe Flacco looks like he's not going to play, right? It seems like he's going to be more of a game time decision. I'm expecting him not to play, but I could also see Jake Browning putting up similar stats than Flacco. We have to keep in mind Jake Browning, when he started the season, he played against some really, really tough defenses. Minnesota, when they were good and healthier, played against Denver, right? Flacco's had some softer matchups. And so ultimately, the reason I bring that up for Brisker is I think they can spread the football out a lot here. That secondary is very, very banged up. And I think that's going to be what they target. Now, keep in mind, I get it. The Bears, defense struggled against Derrick Henry last week, but ultimately before that, they had a couple of good weeks stringing together, stopping the run, which makes me think that the Bengals are going to try to throw the football, open things up, spread things out. And when you look at Jaquan Brisker, the last 3 weeks, right? 3 tackles, 2 solos, 1 assisted, 1 interception, right? Week 7, 6 tackles, 4 solo, 2 assisted, 1 sack, 1 TFL, right? And then against Baltimore, 5 tackles, 4 solo, 1 assisted, right? He's been able to come up with some big plays, interception, sacks, right? They've utilized him kind of more freely, moving him around. But I mean, right now he's got limited coverage exposure. He hasn't seen a ton of action, primarily in coverage. 16 snaps, 0 targets, which to me suggests that he's really going to be more primarily used as a run defender and more of a box safety against the Bengals that can spread the football around the field. I think he's not going to really be able to or be asked to be out there a ton on the coverage snaps because he's not really accustomed to doing so this season. And I just don't think it's going to leave a lot of meat on the bone for him because this offense likes to open things up and spread the defense out because of T. Higgins and Jamar Chase. Noah Fant has started to come alive a little bit too in this offense. And then you also factor in Chase Brown, right, who's starting to kind of string things together even in the pass game. So it's kind of how I see it. I think it gets spread out a lot. And ultimately, I'm not banking on Brisker having a big day here.
And Cincinnati on the season has been like the worst matchup for opposing safeties, giving up like just 7.3 tackles per game. And I think some of that had to do with that early run with Jake Browning at quarterback. They've been a little better with Flacco the last couple of weeks. But if I'm the offensive coordinator for Cincinnati, I'm going to attack this Bears secondary because they're without, we got Tyreek Stevenson, who's kind of banged up. He missed last week's game. They just put Kyler Gordon on IR. And if I am Cincinnati, I'm going to utilize the best part of my team, and that's Jamar Chase and T. Higgins, and I'm going to throw the ball all day on these guys. There's no sense to give the defensive line a chance to make an impact. There's no reason to give TJ Edwards or Tremaine Edmonds a chance to impact this game. And like you mentioned, Brisker plays in that box a lot. He's not the deep safety like Kevin Byard. So Byard might actually be the great play this week, but I'm with you here with Brisker not being the play just because of game script. And whether it is Browning or Flacco, I still think that they're going to try to push the ball to their parts of their offense. And they've had some success the last couple of weeks. Like you mentioned, that those weeks that Browning was the under center was not the most ideal situation to fall into. So
yeah, Brisker maybe, I mean, they might utilize him on some blitzes and, obviously Jake Browning has been, careless with the football. I mean, while those matchups were tough, like he is known to be a gunslinger and this offensive line's not great. So maybe Brisker can get to the quarterback here on some design blitzes. We've seen them send him a lot this year. But yeah, to your point, I think they're just going to spread the football out, which is going to limit how much they can really play tight in that box and keep things condensed. Which again, I think is gonna hinder the ability for him to rack up tackles and make a huge impact on this game.
And you look at Brisker's season too, and you think about like when he faces good offenses, he's not like matchup proof. Like you would think games like he played Dallas this year and he kind of had a clunker. Last week he had a lot of opportunities. Baltimore ran the ball a lot without Lamar Jackson there. Granted, they didn't have those sustained drives that we're used to seeing. Hopefully this week with Lamar Jackson back under center, but sure, he's not matchup proof. And he's just one of those defensive backs that at least for myself, I'm kind of like nervous putting him in the lineup. I always have him in, then I take him out and I put him back in. And then just kind of like, if I push submit in my lineup and like, okay, he's in, but I don't feel good about it. So
yeah.
Last player that we're fading this week, another defensive back that just has us kind of like nervous heading into the week, and that's Jesse Bates for me. Seeing him ranked as the defensive back number 9 on Fantasy Pros just makes me want to cringe here a little bit. I don't know if it's the spooky season of the year, but I think he's just getting a lot of name recognition. Not only is he dealing with an ankle injury that required him to sit out most of the fourth quarter of last week's game, but even in the games that he's played in, he hasn't really done a lot. From a fantasy perspective. In Big 3 scoring this year, he has just one double-digit game this season. That was week 7 versus San Francisco when he had 10 combined tackles. Otherwise, his scoring this week or this season has been 7.5, 3.25, 8.75, 8, 5.75, and 6.5. That is not a league-winning type of player that you drafted early. And he's definitely not the player that we saw in 2023 and 2024. We're just not seeing the splash plays from him that we saw in those seasons. In 2023, he had 3 sacks and 6 INTs. In 2024, he had 4 sacks and 4 INTs. So far in 2025, he has 0 of either one. So he's just not quite doing what we expected him to be doing from the previous 2 seasons. So far this season, he's played 400 snaps. 261 of those has come in that ideal IDP sweet spot that we love, playing in the box, playing on the D line, playing in the slot corner spot. good for 65% of his snaps, but that's not quite elite compared to some of the others around the league. And so he's always kind of been this 50-50 player where he's been playing 50 snaps deep, 50 in the box. So his alignment isn't really something that we can point a reason to him either having or not having a good play. He's just not being efficient with what he's got. So coming off the injury, that's a strike one for me. His snap alignment is not ideal or perfect compared to other players that are probably available on the waiver wire. That's strike two. And the final strike for me is this New England offense is just not good to opposing safeties. They've only allowed 10.6 tackles on the season and just 8.7 in the last three. So for me, Bates is going to have to do a lot to overcome that, to return on investment on a defensive back 9 status that he has this week. Drake May has been low-key kind of balling out this season, and he's just not making mistakes. He only has 3 interceptions on the season. I think 2 were early. I know he did throw up 1 last week, but outside of that, he's been playing really, really well. They've been running the ball efficiently, and if Bates is playing deep, he's not going to be really involved in that tackle opportunities there. So,
yeah, the only pushback I'd have on Bates is this Atlanta defense is super confusing this year. I mean, they play down to their competition so bad, and they play up to the competition, right? I mean, we saw Buffalo. They took care of Buffalo, they played phenomenal against Buffalo. And, Bates, it wasn't like he had the best game, right? 3 tackles against Buffalo. He was targeted a couple of times, right? And again, I'm not saying from Bates' standpoint, he played great. He had he had a touchdown in that game against Buffalo. No, he gave up a touchdown in the game against Buffalo. But ultimately, I feel like that's the only thing I can hang my hat on is their defense has been super confusing this year. But when they've played good offenses, they've stepped up, right? So maybe we can see the same here from Bates, but that just feels like wish casting and not really saying, hey, this is exactly why it's going to happen. It's really just hey, can't really put a thumb on the pulse of what this defense looks like on a week-by-week basis. But we've known that they just don't come up. And we saw them against Carolina. We just saw them get their teeth kicked in by Miami after we've seen them in some spots where they made the Vikings look absolutely silly. They made Buffalo look silly. So, Jesse Bates is a leader on this defense. Maybe he gets them up for this game. I would hope. But to your point, I mean, he's got 213 snaps inside the box this year, which I think is actually pacing to be one of the higher years that he's had snaps inside the box, but it's not really translating to him getting and racking up tackles. Maybe it has to do with a lot of the young guys that they brought in, kind of cleaning things up and making Bates not have to be mainly a one-man band next to AJ Terrell on this horrific defense. But ultimately, when I think about the game script, Ramondre Stevenson maybe doesn't play. We'll see that. But I think ultimately they can run the football a lot. Maybe that helps Bates if he's staying inside the box because they are going to run the football. But if Stevenson's out, they may actually continue to throw it. And I don't think that benefits Bates because he kind of plays all over the field in coverage. And so he's not matching up and you're not saying, hey, he's going to play on Stephon Diggs and they're going to target him a ton, but he's not going to probably stick on to one specific player. He's going to kind of roam all over the place. So, yeah, he's a tough guy to kind of pin down this year. I don't have any pushback in terms of why I would say he's a fade. I don't have any strong argument as to why I'd be super, super confident starting him either. So
he's just one of those players, too, that's tough because – draft capital, if you're in a redraft league, you took him earlier. He was, living off of 2023, 2024. He had 2 consistent seasons. Obviously, Cincinnati let him go because of the salary cap. Atlanta was more than willing to bring him in, kind of like you mentioned as a leader on that defense. We just haven't seen the production meet the expectation, I think, this year. And so at a very volatile position like the defensive backs, I'm much more willing to move on now as a more seasoned IDP player than I would have been a couple seasons ago. But, name value only gets you so much. And he might be like one of those pieces like, what, I'm going to, especially coming off the ankle injury, I don't know if he's going to be limited at all and things like that heading into this week. And so that's just a tough sell too, especially with so many options at the defensive back position. He's just one of those players that like, I could probably find somebody better, safer, more consistent. So recapping those players that were kind of fading this week at the defensive line position, we had a duo of the Will Anderson and Danielle Hunter Houston Texans. We've got Alex Singleton and Daiyan Henley at the linebackers, and then Jaquan Brisker and Jesse Bates at the defensive back position. So, Pete, now's our chance to kind of talk about a player that at this point in the season, whether it's from injury, snap alignment, coaching philosophy, that just has us scratching our heads as to how or why they're not performing or doing what we thought they would be. So who's that player for you?
Yeah, I kind of went a little bit outside the box on this one. I tried to be a little more fun, and I chose Kyle Duggar, right? Newly traded player to the Pittsburgh Steelers. I will say that Deshaun Elliott, right, injury, I think he slots in pretty nicely. But it was kind of a really weird situation with the Patriots. It kind of felt like we've been hearing for a really long time that they want to move off of this guy, and they signed him to an extension in 2024, right? And it was pretty much downhill from there. 4 years, 66 million. Before the season started, he was coming off of a year where he looked really, really good in 2023. They used him in various different pressure scenarios. He generated in 2023, 15 total pressures, 10 hurries, most of his career. And they utilized him in a lot of different ways. Very, very flexible, kind of like a Swiss Army knife, right? And then you look at last year, he generated just 7 pressures and 6 hurries, and this year just 1 pressure, right? They just were not utilizing him a ton, and the snap count was very strange, right? He was averaging 30 snaps per game this year, but he didn't have more than 20 snaps in his first 3 games. Over the last 2 weeks before they traded him, he had over 50 snaps, right? Over 50 snaps in both of those games, right? They kind of showcased him a little bit, and I think the Steelers are biting, right? And so they're going to bring him in, right? I think he adds versatility and a physicality that kind of aligns, with Mike Tomlin's defense and what he's looking for. He's been able to demonstrate the ability to kind of play both the safety position and contribute in the nickel, as well as kind of being in different packages with the flexibility to kind of come in the box and blitz. I mean, like I said, Swiss Army knife. So I'm excited and kind of interested to see how he fits into that veteran secondary over there with the Steelers that's struggled a lot lately, and see how Mike Tomlin utilizes a little bit of a new chess piece that he has. Because as we'd said, the utilization was super, super weird with the Patriots. And this is a guy that they looked and seemed like they liked just a year ago. And then things kind of soured. Don't know if it was a culture thing, a locker room thing. His PFF grades were down for what it's worth. But I don't say that PFF is gospel, but they are, again, a good source, and they kind of had his grades down since he signed the extension, and maybe that's something that Patriots are looking at as well. But they really turned their backs on him quickly, and the utilization was really strange. I'm interested to see, and he's a speculative player that I'd keep an eye on going over to a Mike Tomlin defense that I think should use him more exotically over there in Pittsburgh.
I like this call, especially since, like, going forward, he might be a player with a chip on his shoulder, might want to prove something. Being with Jalen Ramsey, they both are kind of like that, like, mindset where maybe they kind of play up with each other. I did see a weird comment today from one of the Pittsburgh beat writers that the trade wasn't processed by the NFL.
No.
So I don't know, like, if he didn't pass a physical or what it might be. But I did read that was a Pittsburgh beat writer, Nick Farbaugh. I saw that from. So again, just everything on Twitter is real. So you have to believe it for what it's worth. But I can totally see that being in the realm of the Kyle Duggar extravaganza news. So hopefully this deal gets done. Yeah, hopefully the deal gets done, and hopefully we see him. Probably not this week, but he definitely could be a player that could be a great stash. If you want to get out ahead of your league mates, you've got an empty spot, maybe he would be a fun player just to kind of roster to see, give him a week or two and move on from. So as Johnny the Greek always says, for the price of a mouse click, he could be yours. This could be one of those great, league changing pickups that you make that can kind of change the outcome of the season for you.
Yeah, I like that.
Player that I'm going to kind of end on here that has me confused, Jamien Sherwood, the New York Giants. I know they're on a bye this week, thank goodness. Prior to last week, he played 100% of snaps, and then for whatever reason, the Jets benched him in the first quarter of last week. it was kind of speculation like, oh, he's traded, he's just kind of holding him out and stuff like that. But then we saw him out there for the second, third, and fourth quarter. He had his first single-digit game of the season last year because of it. The only kind of like saving grace is, like I mentioned, they're on a bye this week, so we can't like hurt us in our lineups this week. But he's just been a player that's been so dominant over the last year and the beginning of this year. I think it's more of an issue with the Jets than it is with the player. I'm really hoping that he gets traded before next Tuesday's trade deadline. I would love to see him in San Francisco, get reunited with Robert Saleh, who he played with as the head coach there in the Jets. I just think with the need in San Francisco for a linebacker, the continuity that he already has with Saleh, I think he just makes a seamless transition to that. And it would be kind of a rare win-win-win, I think, for everyone involved. Not only would San Francisco get a linebacker that they desperately need, not only would the Jets be able to get some draft capital, but they also trade him out of division. So it's not like they would see him again, very often, if rarely, because of the matchup being the AFC and the NFC. So, not that I'm putting a lot of stock in Woody there to do the right thing, but come on, man, just do the right thing once. Let's just make this happen. So.
Yeah, it's funny. We talk about two players that, getting extensions and then souring with their teams, right? I mean, Sherwood signs an extension this offseason, right? It's only 3 years, $45 million. So we talk about a lot of players and like, it's not Madden, right? Guys don't just get traded. But given the fact that, it's only a 3-year deal, and, he's already played a decent amount of this year, right? The guaranteed and the hit wouldn't be nearly as bad. And this is a team that could definitely accept that, especially given the fact that they are not hitting a complete reset, right? I don't buy into that completely. You still need players like to go forward and young players too. But as you said, I mean, he's a good player that could absolutely help a team right now. And the 49ers make a lot of sense with Robert Saleh. There's a relationship there. They need a lot of help, right? They're clearly being buyers right now. I do expect the Jets to be sellers, and I expect them to make some moves. Maybe this is a possibility that they get in on the action and make a move with him. But yeah, I mean, super, super disappointed. And this has been a guy that's been one that we've been able to trust, and he really hasn't came through. And we'll see. Fingers crossed at the deadline that he finds himself maybe in a better situation. But the defense for the Jets has been super disappointing. I mean, when Aaron Glenn came over, we expected this defense to continue to be good. If there was one thing, Smash Mouth running the football, Smash Mouth with a good defense, right? And Robert Saleh, for all his flaws, that defense still played tough and hard for him. There's not a lot of turnover from last year, this year. And for some reason, it almost looks like a completely different team on defense. I don't know if it's scheme. I would have thought they would have started to click a little bit by now. We're halfway through the year, and it's not happening. So maybe Sherwood's not picking up the defense as well. I don't know, but it's super weird that the defense as a whole has just been super disappointing, and something that if there was one thing we expected to be good with this new regime, with this defense, it's Aaron Glenn, ex-New York Jets defensive player, to get them right, and it hasn't happened. Hasn't happened for Sherwood either. So we'll see what they do at the deadline here. But yeah, it's super confusing. I would definitely agree with that as well.
And they've got some studs at all the levels. They got Quincy Williams, they got Quentin Williams, they got Sherwood, they got Will McDonald, they've got another player that's probably on the trading block with Jermaine Johnson. They got Sauce Gardner. I mean, they've got some like pieces to build around on that defense. And like you said, it's just kind of a head scratcher. Like the one thing we thought for sure that New York was going to have a decent of was the defense. And now all of a sudden we see all these players like on the trade block and possibly playing for another team after next Tuesday. So just a quick question, Pete, do you often find that the trade deadline is a bigger deal for the hopium that things are going to happen than in reality, or are you kind of disappointed with how the trade deadline plays out?
I hate the trade deadline, man. I think it is the, I don't even know if I'm allowed to say this on the show. It is like it's like blue balls. It is just like the biggest buzzkill in the world, man. I mean, we hear all the rumors, we hear all these things, these teams are talking, and it just feels like it's stirred up, drama that never really comes through. I think the baseball deadline tends to be more interesting and exciting. I think The NFL deadline tends to be the guys that are good are generally not moved. The guys that are moved are typically, depth pieces, right? It's not a lot of teams. Maybe we see one big splash. We saw Von Miller be a key piece for the Rams in that, in their run. We saw Bradley Chubb get traded for a first round pick to the Dolphins midseason, right? Obviously Denver, being in both of those, it's kind of more fresh in my mind. But just ultimately, like, it's just how we haven't really seen these big trades. I mean, Amari Cooper got moved. He was a shell. So I just think it's a lot of, like you said, hopium, and it doesn't really come to fruition like many hope. I'd love to see some action, but like Breece Hall is another guy that I keep saying, like, I don't think like, we're talking about Myles Garrett getting possibly moved. Like, there's just no way. He just signed, like, he's got a
Max
$124
Crosby,
million deal he just got signed to. Crosby just signed a big deal too. Like, it's just not happening. It's great to talk about. It's fun to speculate, but it's kind of like, you ever see that meme where the guy opens up the dinner where, like, if you get room service and you open it up and the food's in there, like, he says you get nothing for dinner. Like, he opens it up and says, like, this is what you get, and it's nothing. Like, that's the
NFL trade deadline. You get nothing. Yeah.
100%. That's what we're gonna say.
Yep. And like, I think you had a great point too about, like, teams need some players to play. They can't just, like, totally, like, sell off everything and, like, start rolling out, like, practice squad players, because that's no good for the product and for the fan base and stuff like that. Yeah. So they're going to need to retain players. And, like, whether, like you mentioned with the Jets, with like an Aaron Glenn, like, he wants to build his culture of guys, is that like where they maybe have to do like a little bit more of a reset to get the players and the culture that he wants to do. But it kind of felt like, taking this job over, he had some of those players and pieces in place, and now we're speculating that they're not going to be playing there come next in week 10, which seems kind of odd that the whole thing needs to be changed. Breece Hall is going to be gone. Obviously there's going to be a new quarterback in New York, because if the owner in New York comes out and says what he says, and Fields has to do what he did, like, that was just a fiasco in itself. So definitely is some changes coming for Gang Green.
Yeah, I'll say. Something they're used to, though.
Unfortunately, yeah, for their fans as well. So,
yeah.
All right. So, Pete, before we go, just kind of wrap up here a little bit. What are some tricks of the trade that you have done or found yourself kind of utilizing, kind of having success with in fantasy football from a fantasy manager aspect?
Yeah, I think it's really finding, it's really seeing the forest through the trees, right? Like, trying to sift through what's real, what's not. Utilization is key, right? So obviously, one thing I love to look at is, like, the snaps that players are playing, right? We talked about it all day on this show, how many snaps this guy's playing, right? You start to kind of, if I'm looking to buy a player, I start to look at guys that are slowly ticking up in their snaps, right? And those are guys that I start to say those guys become a little bit on my radar. So that's one. And then two, I try to tell people, like, you have to it's like chess, right? Like, you want to try to buy players that maybe they are underperforming, and I try to, like, we talk about Jesse Bates, right? Like, who is a player that a lot of people bought high on, right? Spent a lot of draft capital, right? And for you, it's a sunk cost for them. Like, to you, it doesn't matter what Jesse Bates draft capital was, right? Like, Jesse Bates might be worth I don't know, like we'll say like Will Anderson. We'll just throw a random person out. But the point is, like, what the person spent, you have to try to keep in mind that what they spent is not what you spent. And ultimately, like, I think I try to look for damaged goods in cheap bargain buys, right? Like, where people feel soured. And especially when you go into echo chambers, say you're on Twitter and you hear a lot of people and they're completely out on people, right? And they're like, everyone's kind of trending. Like, I try to look at those guys and sometimes try to buy them too a little bit, right? It's almost like everyone's saying, this guy's going to have a smash week. Those are usually the guys that don't have a smash week, especially like the speculative plays. So I try to, I kind of shot out a lot out there just now, but ultimately my biggest thing is just try to try to stay the course, right? Listen to people that you trust, that you value their opinion, that you feel like are giving good analysis, right? There's going to be a lot of different people that are throwing a lot of different ideas out there at you. And ultimately just try to find a process that makes sense for you. And this is the tough part of the season. Don't give up, right? I mean, this is where a lot of teams start to hit the coast button, where maybe you're in a lot of home leagues and a lot of people just really, I've made playoffs where I've been 1-5 to start the year. Like, I mean, it happens, right? So I think just keep trying to scrape it, and try to have one bench spot that you're continuously rotating for higher upside players. Those are just some things that I like to do. And yeah, I know I throw a lot at you. I didn't really prepare for a ton there. I was trying to weave my way, weave in and out there. But those are just a couple of things that I like to kind of keep in mind.
And I think anyone who's played the game long enough kind of knows exactly the sentiment that you're saying. They have this idea of, chasing volume, because volume, especially in IDP, leads to production, and the production leads to fantasy points. Always looking for ways to improve your lineup, that turning over of the roster spots and things like that. So, anyone who's listened to the show long enough, or any of the IDP show content, you kind of know exactly where you're coming from. So all good stuff, sir. Before we put a ribbon on this episode, sir, what are some things that you're working on right now, and where can the fantastic listening audience find some more of your work?
Yeah, so I do a defensive streamers video every single week. I identify 3 defenses to stream that are 25% owned or less. It's something that's probably my favorite piece of content that I put out each and every week. We've been successful. We obviously have our misses in between the makes. 7 out of 8 weeks this year, one of the 3 defenses finished inside the top 3 in scoring on the week, and they were all 25% owned or less. So I take pride and enjoyment of saying I don't draft defenses high in redraft managed leagues, because I think you can find edges, and every single week, if you dig in and spend a little bit of extra time just looking at the matchups to find those edges on the waivers, rather than just sticking out a good defense every week, even in tough matchups, because you spent draft capital in them and because they're just a good defense and you don't want to drop them. So that's what I spend a lot of my time on. I'm doing that. I'm also working on Player Profiler. I do the top 10 takeaways on Mondays live. You can find me there as well. And I do my Start Sit show on the Face Off Sports Network Thursdays and Sunday mornings as well.
And I'm going to bet that you hear more about that 1 week that you missed the streamers than the 7 weeks that you nailed it. So that's just par for the course out there in the Twitter streets for sure. So
yeah, it's all ebbs and flows, right? It's all none of us are perfect, right? At the end of the day, we're all just trying to have a little bit of fun and trying to make the best educated guesses that we can.
Yep. And that's 100% accurate. We enjoy what we do. We love doing this. And, if we can share some of our love for the game that we have, and, it's backed by a little bit of research. I don't want to call it science, because it's really not science, but, it's more than just a dart throw. There's some reason and some rationale behind it. So
sure.
Well, that's going to do it for this episode of the IDP After Show. I want to thank Pete again for coming on and sharing some of the fantastic knowledge that he has about the game that we all love. Be sure to follow him and catch all of the great content that he does each and every single week. Speaking of following, if you're not doing so already, please make sure you hit that like and subscribe button so you're always made aware of the great content that's made here at the IDP Show all week long. Join me next week as Shane Helm makes his inaugural appearance on the show as we break down the Week 10 IDP landscape. Week 10 already. That is crazy. Until then, for Pete and myself, we say thank you for joining us, and best of luck to you and your teams in Week 9. Take care, and we'll see you next time.
This was the IDP After Show.